December the 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor, the main base of the United States Pacific Fleet. Hundreds of sailors are still asleep. The battleships sit in the harbor so close together, it looks like the war does not exist at all. A few hundred miles away, Japan has already launched an operation that in 2 hours will humiliate the United States in front of the entire world. But the attack itself is not the strangest part of this story, because a week before the strike, American intelligence had already intercepted Japanese messages. On the morning of December the 7th, radar operators spotted incoming aircraft. Some officers were warning directly that something was coming, and still nobody did anything. Why? How did the largest fleet on the planet become a target that never even tried to defend itself? Who ignored the warnings? And was Pearl Harbor really just a sudden disaster? Or was it a chain of failures that cost America thousands of lives? Today, we break down the day that pulled the United States into World War II. The day that changed the course of history forever. And at the center of that chain of failures stood one man. The Navy needed someone to blame for it. They picked him in 10 days. It took the United States government 58 years to admit they had picked the wrong man. To understand how this happened, go back 6 days. December the 1st, 1941. In Washington, a small group of codebreakers sat inside a locked room, reading messages most of the United States government did not even know existed. They had broken a Japanese diplomatic code called Purple. For months, the messages coming out of Tokyo had been getting darker. Embassies were burning their codebooks. Japanese ships had gone silent. 6 aircraft carriers had left Japan and vanished into the North Pacific. 353 aircraft sat on their flight decks, fueled, armed, ready. For 9 days, those carriers moved east in total radio silence. Not one message, not one mistake. The man who designed that operation was Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. He had lived in the United States. He had studied at Harvard. He knew exactly how big this country was and exactly how angry it would become. In a private letter, written months before the attack, Yamamoto told a friend something strange for a man about to start a war. He said he could run wild for 6 months, maybe a year. After that, he admitted he had no confidence at all. The man Yamamoto was about to attack commanded the largest fleet the United States had ever assembled in the Pacific. His name was Admiral Husband Edward Kimmel, 59 years old, 42 years in the Navy. In February of 1941, President Franklin Roosevelt had jumped Kimmel over more senior officers and given him command of the entire Pacific Fleet. 8 battleships, dozens of cruisers and destroyers, 2 aircraft carriers. It was one of the largest military commands on the planet. For 10 months, Kimmel had been asking Washington for help. More long-range patrol planes, more radar stations, clearer intelligence on what Japan was doing. Again and again, his requests went east, to the people who were supposed to be watching Japan for him. Here is the part almost nobody knew at the time. On November the 27th, 10 days before the attack, Kimmel received a message from the Chief of Naval Operations. 2 words: war warning. But that warning pointed him in the wrong direction. It told him an attack was likely against the Philippines, against Thailand, against Malaya. It said nothing about Hawaii. The men in Washington, reading the most sensitive intercepts, believed Pearl Harbor was too far away and too well defended to be worth Japan's time. Hold on to this number. In the days before December the 7th, at least 8 separate intercepted messages, taken together, showed Japanese ships moving east in complete silence. Almost none of those 8 messages ever reached Kimmel. Some never left Washington at all. The codebreakers in that locked room already knew something was coming. They just had not told the one man standing closest to it. December the 7th, 1941, 6:58 in the morning, 72 degrees, clear skies. At the Apana radar station, on the northern tip of Oahu, 2 young privates were finishing their shift. Their names were Joseph Lockard and George Elliott. At 7:02, their radar screen lit up with the largest signal either of them had ever seen. Lockard called it in. The officer on duty told him not to worry about it. He guessed it was a flight of American bombers due in from California that morning. It was not American bombers. It was 183 Japanese aircraft, 40 minutes from Pearl Harbor. At 7:55, the first wave came in low over the mountains, engines screaming straight down onto Battleship Row. In the next 110 minutes, the United States Navy lost 2,335 servicemen. The USS Arizona took a bomb straight down into her forward magazine and went down in 9 minutes, taking 1,177 men with her. 18 ships were sunk or damaged. 328 aircraft were destroyed on the ground, lined up wingtip to wingtip, exactly as regulations required to guard against sabotage from saboteurs who never came. Admiral Kimmel watched it happen from the window of his headquarters. A spent bullet came through the glass and struck him in the chest. It did not break the skin. It left a bruise. He picked it up off the floor, looked at it, and said quietly to the men standing near him that it would have been merciful if it had killed him. What happened next does not fit any military doctrine ever written. Within 10 days, the United States government needed someone to answer for the worst defeat in its history. On December the 17th, 1941, Kimmel was relieved of command. His 4 stars were taken away. He was reduced to his permanent peacetime rank, 2 stars, Rear Admiral, and quietly moved to a desk job 3,000 miles from the wreckage. A presidential commission placed the primary blame for the disaster on 2 men, Kimmel and his Army counterpart, General Walter Short. The findings went straight to the newspapers, while the country was still burying its dead. Headlines across America called Kimmel guilty of dereliction of duty. Letters poured in from families who had lost sons on Battleship Row, demanding a court-martial, demanding prison, demanding his name erased from the Navy entirely. In February of 1942, Kimmel did something almost no officer in his position would do. He formally requested his own court-martial. He believed it was the only way he would ever be allowed to show the country what Washington had known and what it had never sent him. The Navy refused. A trial, he was told, would have to wait until the war was over. A young sailor who survived the sinking of the USS Oklahoma wrote home that week. He told his mother that nobody on the island had known the attack was coming, not the sailors, not the officers, and as far as he could tell, not the admiral either. That letter sat folded in a drawer in Ohio for the next 60 years. Nobody in Washington ever read it. What Kimmel did not know, in February of 1942, was what was already moving in the other direction across the Pacific. He did not know about a tiny island called Midway. He did not know that in 4 months, the same carriers that had wrecked his fleet would sail toward that island, confident, expecting another easy morning. He did not know any of it. He only knew one thing. He had been relieved, demoted, and sent home to wait for a trial that might never come. For the next 2.5 years, while the war he had warned about burned across the Pacific, Admiral Kimmel waited. He was not in a prison camp. He was not starving. But the war found his family anyway. His son, Lieutenant Commander Manning Kimmel, commanded the submarine USS Robalo. In July of 1944, the Robalo was lost in the Balabac Strait with all hands, 54 men. Manning Kimmel's body was never recovered. The same Navy that had stripped his father of 2 stars now sent that father a telegram informing him that his son was missing, presumed dead. Think about that bullet again, the one that bruised his chest and never broke the skin. He survived that morning. His son did not survive the war that morning started. Through 1944, Kimmel's health began to break in ways that had nothing to do with bullets. He developed severe ulcers. His blood pressure climbed so high that doctors warned him directly that the stress of the ongoing investigations could kill him before any trial ever happened. His wife, Dorothy, watched her husband age 10 years in 2, watched him write the same explanations over and over to congressmen who had already decided not to believe him. In 1944, the Navy finally convened its own court of inquiry, away from the headlines. For the first time, officers under oath admitted that critical intelligence had never reached Kimmel. The findings were more careful, more honest than anything the public had been told 2 years earlier. The findings were also stamped secret. They went into a file. The file went into a vault. The headlines from 1941 stayed exactly where they were, printed, read, and believed by tens of millions of Americans who would never see a single page of what that vault contained. In 1946, a joint congressional committee opened the largest Pearl Harbor investigation yet. Kimmel sat for hours, answering questions about messages he had never seen, sent between men he had never met, in rooms 3,000 miles from where he had been standing on December the 7th. The committee spread the blame wider than before. But when it was over, nothing changed. Kimmel's 2 stars stayed 2 stars. His record stayed exactly as it was. He retired from the Navy in 1947 after 48 years of service, at the same rank he had held before Roosevelt ever gave him the Pacific Fleet. 2 stars, Rear Admiral, the rank of a man who had never commanded a single battleship. For the rest of his life, Kimmel kept fighting. In 1955, he published a memoir. In it, he laid out, message by message, exactly what Washington had known and exactly what it had never sent him. He spent the next 13 years writing letters to senators, meeting with historians, building a case file of his own to sit beside the one Washington had locked away. Husband Kimmel died on May the 14th, 1968, in Groton, Connecticut. He was 86 years old. He died holding the rank of Rear Admiral. 2 stars. The same 2 stars he had carried for 27 years. The same 2 stars that were still on his uniform the day they buried him. In the vault in Washington, the folder was still sealed. The folder stayed sealed for decades. Inside it sat the messages Kimmel never saw. In 1995, a Pentagon review reopened the case. Investigators pulled the old intercepts out of storage and laid them side by side with the warnings Kimmel actually received. The conclusion was simple. Washington had information Kimmel needed. Washington did not send it. The report said something the headlines of 1941 never said. Kimmel and General Short had not been the primary cause of the disaster. They had been the men standing closest to it when it happened. 54 years. That is how long it took for the United States government to write that sentence down. Here is the number that changes everything. 6 months. That is how long Yamamoto told his own government he could fight before the odds turned against Japan. 5 months and 29 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States Navy met that same Japanese carrier force near a small island called Midway. 4 Japanese carriers went to the bottom of the Pacific in a single day. The same admiral who had built the Pearl Harbor strike force watched it happen from his flagship and could do nothing. The lessons from Pearl Harbor built that victory. Radar stations went up across the Pacific. Code-breaking units were centralized and protected. Warnings that once died in Washington now reached commanders within hours. Was Pearl Harbor a defeat? Look at the number again. 6 months was supposed to be Japan's window. America needed 5 months and 29 days to walk through the door Pearl Harbor had blown open and close it forever. Kimmel never lived to read the 1995 report. He died in 1968, still wearing 2 stars. But his sons did not stop. Edward Kimmel, his surviving son, spent years pushing the Navy for the files. After Edward died, his own son, Thomas Kimmel, a retired Navy captain, picked up the fight. He filed requests. He waited. Page by page, the black ink came off the old intercepts. What those pages showed was not complicated. 8 intercepted messages, a war warning that pointed at the wrong ocean. A radar contact called in and waved off. None of it had ever reached the man standing on the dock at Pearl Harbor on the morning of December the 7th. October the 14th, 1999. The United States Senate, 52 votes to 47. The Senate passed a resolution stating that husband Kimmel and Walter Short had performed their duties competently and professionally, and that the political and military leadership in Washington bore significant responsibility for the failure to share warnings before Pearl Harbor. In the gallery, Thomas Kimmel sat with the declassified folder on his lap. 58 years after his grandfather lost his command in 10 days, the Senate of the United States stood up and said the words his grandfather had spent 13 years writing in letters nobody answered. It did not give him back his 4 stars. The Navy never restored the rank. But it did something his grandfather never had in his lifetime. It put the truth on the record, in the Congress that once condemned him, in writing that cannot be quietly filed away again. 2 stars. That is the rank carved on husband Kimmel's headstone in Arlington National Cemetery. 2 stars, next to his wife Dorothy, and near the grave marker of a son the ocean never gave back. The Navy that demoted him in 10 days never reversed it. The Senate that cleared his name never made it official rank. Both things are true. Both things sit on the same hill in Arlington. Pearl Harbor cost the United States 2,335 lives in 110 minutes. It cost one admiral his name for the rest of his life and for 31 years after his death. He is still buried as a rear admiral. 2 stars. The Navy never sent the other 2.